In today's video, we're going to talk about Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. Thomas Sowell is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. He's taught economics at a bunch of different universities, including Cornell, UCLA, and Rutgers, among others. He's also written several books and several economic papers. Knowing this, I want to start out by saying that this book is very much basic economics. The title pretty much tells you everything you need to know about the book. It's not an in-depth course on economics. My siblings have all taken college-level econ classes, and through their studies I know that they know plenty more terms and facts and figures and how to graph data than I do from reading this book. But as someone who didn't take an econ class in college, I found it particularly helpful to kind of set the stage of what is economics. And as a quick aside, thanks to my brother for recommending this book. Knowing this, let's jump into my 3 key takeaways from the book. My first takeaway from Basic Economics is that all of life has risks. What stood out to me about this idea mostly has to do with work. I've often wondered if starting something as a self-employed individual is more risky than working for someone at a big corporation. Some of the people I've talked to would argue, yes, there are more risks in starting something on your own, and other people will have argued, well, there are still risks in working for a big corporation. So it's not that there aren't risks in working for a big corporation, and it's not that there aren't risks in doing something on your own. It's just that the distribution of risk is different in working for somebody versus working for yourself. For example, when you work for someone else, you might have the risk of getting laid off or fired at any particular time, especially in states where any point in time you can be hired or fired. But on the flip side, as someone who's self-employed, you have the risks of being hired or fired at whim, as well as the risks of being sued in certain cases, running out of money, and in general having to follow the law in ways that you might not be as exposed to if you were working for a large corporation. The corporation, or the people running the corporation, have those risks that you have as a self-employed individual on their shoulders, so that you don't have to hold the risks yourself. And Thomas Sowell points out the fact that you ought to know what your tolerance for risk is as you're going through work and as you're developing kind of your goal, life plan, etc. Some people feel only really comfortable if they're paid by the day and employed by the day. Now, the risk of being employed by the day is that you don't know if you're going to be employed tomorrow. On the other hand, someone who's paid at the end of the week or the end of a couple weeks has different risks and exposures to risk. So on the one side of risk, you have weekly and monthly salaried employment and daily employment. And then on the other side of that equation, you might have things like drilling for oil, where you might spend decades before you find any oil, spending millions of dollars. Or if you are being educated in the arts, you might spend hundreds of thousands of dollars getting an education in arts. And you might see it prosper in the first year, or it might take a whole lifetime to really see things come to fruition. As you're deciding what you want to do in life, you ought to consider how much risk can you handle, and that might change over time. If you want to do something more risky, consider gradually stretching yourself over the course of several years. All of that to say, all of life has its risks. All work opportunities have their risks. You just have to decide what risks are you willing to take to do what you want to do in life. My second takeaway from the book is the idea of comparative advantage. Now, this is one topic that the book brings up that was also covered in the econ classes that my various siblings have taken. It was a particularly interesting topic that I found really opened my eyes as far as why, say, the United States doesn't just produce everything that they want and need in life. So what is comparative advantage? Well, let me give you an example. Say you're going camping with several friends and you bring along an expert camper. Now, this particular expert camper is able to pitch a tent better than anyone in the group, build a fire better than anyone in the group, and cook food better than anyone in the group. Now, suppose that you had that particular camper do everything for you. Would that be the best use of their time and of your time? Generally speaking, no. It would be better if you found out what that really great camper was really good at, whether that was cooking or building a fire or building a tent. What is the thing that that expert camper is particularly skilled at that is heads over everyone else? Comparative advantage is saying, let's have that expert camper do the thing that they are super specialized at, and then everyone else can do things that they are better at than somebody else in the group. By taking into account comparative advantage, everyone in the group benefits. You could have the expert camper do everything in camp, but they will just be exhausted and frustrated, and the work will be done much slower than if everybody pitches in, and you focus everybody's efforts on what they are comparatively advantaged over everybody else at. That's the concept of comparative advantage. My third takeaway from the book is that economics is the study of using limited resources for limited use cases. What I took away from this idea is that without limited resources or limited uses, there is no economy. The economy and the study of economy only exist because our resources across the world are limited. And on that note, something that I came away from the book thinking a lot about is that the economy is really people exchanging those resources. And you really have to remember that at the end of the day, it's people making transactions. It's people that sell things to one another. It's people that distribute limited resources. On YouTube, you might have heard certain creators like MrBeast talk about how you really should think of the algorithm of YouTube as your audience. And if you start to think of the algorithm as your audience, you'll create videos for the audience. In the same way, if you start thinking of the market as people, you'll start looking at the products and services that you might try and sell to as having to fit into someone's needs and having to find the best use of resources. That was a bit of a poorly constructed sentence, but essentially what I'm getting at is the more we recognize that the economy needs people, it's people who exchange resources, that we can begin to make it work for us. Ideally, this is helpful in understanding why we have brands. Brands are also a relatively new concept. The reason so many companies are building on brands and reputation is because people work off of reputation and trust. They always have, and presumably they always will. So if you're seeking to sell something in the marketplace, remember that what you're selling ought to be something that people can trust and that has a good reputation. If you do these two things, it will sell, and over time it will develop, and people will like it and share it with their friends. You can drive more limited resources to your limited uses simply by building trust and reputation into whatever you're developing. A good example of this is all the fast food restaurants or coffee shops that you might see in your city or hometown. Suppose you were going on vacation and you stopped in a small town on the side of the road, and there was a Starbucks and there was a local coffee shop. You might be someone adventurous who's willing to try out the local coffee shop, or you might feel more comfortable with trusting a brand that you're familiar with. At the end of the day, you're allocating limited resources to the limited use of buying a coffee. And you might use your limited resources to buy a coffee that you're likewise familiar with, that you have some trust in. Even if you don't, though, the funny thing about reputation and trust is that the more companies put their reputation on the line, the more other companies are more or less forced to do the same. Because there's a Starbucks in that particular town, that local coffee shop might realize that they have to create a better product and create a reputation of their own to survive. So you might be just as well off going to the local coffee shop simply because that Starbucks exists. And the people running the coffee shop may recognize that people who are going to Starbucks are expecting the trust and reputation of getting a Starbucks coffee. So in order to compete in the marketplace and get those limited resources to the limited use of buying their coffee, they have to deliver a better product and create better trust and reputation for themselves. Ultimately, through trust and reputation, we all wind up with better goods and services across the board. And with that, that's the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a big thumbs up, and if you haven't done so already, subscribe down below, and I will see you in the next video. Totally.